Ever feel like the resources and advice out there for women are missing something essential? I thought so too, which is why more than 6 years ago, I created She Said, She Said. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and after 3 decades in communications and then advocacy, and now juggling motherhood and entrepreneurship, trust me, friend, I get it. Making a real impact takes more than just passion. It takes the right mindset, the right skills, the right investments, and the right community. On this show, we dive deep with incredible women from all walks of life who have been there. We uncover the secrets to building influence, navigating tricky relationships, and staying true to ourselves even when it's tough. And let's face it, it often is. I also throw in my own favorite productivity and life hacks, things that have shifted my perspective and might help you too. Wherever you are in your journey, my goal here is to leave you inspired to define success your way and to help you build the confidence you need to tackle your biggest goals. Subscribe today and let's unlock your full potential, your confidence, and your greatest influence. Hey friend, welcome to She Said, She Said podcast. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and this is episode 326. Today, we're diving into a concept that I think might completely transform how you think about career advancement. My guest today is Lareina Yee. She is an executive partner at McKinsey, and she's also the co-author of a fascinating new book called The Broken Rung. Lareina brings incredible insights from her extensive career at McKinsey, and that has included co-founding the Women in the Workplace Research Initiative, which has given us more than a decade of data-driven insights into women and careers. Now, Lareina and her colleagues, who are co-authors on this book, have identified something that they say is a much more significant obstacle, if you will, than the so-called glass ceiling. They point to something called a broken rung on the career ladder that actually impacts women much earlier than we typically associate with the glass ceiling. What really caught my attention, though, in this research is the concept of experience capital. Said another way, that is essentially the currency that fuels your career advancement. You know, those professional experiences that you collect that allow you to stretch and to demonstrate your capabilities and also your readiness for bigger and bigger roles. I know as I was reading this book and thinking about my own career, I was often taking jobs not because they were the safest option or because they were the best paying option, but rather because they provided a significant opportunity for me to really learn and to expand my perspective and my skill sets and ultimately my network. And those were the experiences that really made the biggest difference for me from a career standpoint. Now, of course, I didn't have the language to call this experience capital, but I can certainly attest to its value. We talk about that in this conversation. Today, we'll unpack exactly what Lareina and her co-authors mean by experience capital, how to strategically build it, and why it might be a missing piece in your career development. We will explore questions like what kinds of roles help you maximize experience capital, why P&L responsibility matters so much, how switching jobs more frequently could actually benefit you, and then how motherhood can potentially serve as an experience capital accelerator rather than a setback. I think there's a lot that you're going to find super interesting about this conversation. So, without delay, here is episode 326, my conversation with McKinsey's Lareina Yee. Enjoy. Lareina, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. Congratulations on this new book. It's called The Broken Rung. It is fantastic. I am really excited to talk to you about the book and about several of the concepts in the book. But before we get to that, I would love for you to share a little bit of your backstory. How did you get here?
Well, sometimes your side hustle becomes something that's incredibly important to you. So I think you can imagine where I'm going with this. So, I think I started at the very beginning, the bottom, the first entry level job at McKinsey, and I was working my way up. And I was elected partner, which was a huge milestone. And this was a while ago. This was over 15 years ago. And I looked up and I was like, where did all the women go? Why am I doubling the population when I walk into a client meeting, both on both sides?
Right.
And I had all these questions. and um I mean, the questions were brewing over the years, but I think it was at that moment where I had a natural point to reflect and I felt empowered as a leader to ask the hard questions. And also maybe a little regret that I wasn't asking them earlier. And so asking questions is a little bit of what I do. And so asking questions led to more questions, which demanded data for some answers. And so
Right.
I started doing research to understand the organization and systems in terms of understanding why companies weren't seeing women at the top. Why do we have a glass ceiling? And that led to a big journey, and I call it the side hustle because sometimes you do things on top of your job because you just know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I collaborated with two of my incredible colleagues, Quaylen and Maria. And 2.5 years ago, we said we've been all looking at this for years. We've all served as McKinsey's chief diversity officer on top of having a P&L role at McKinsey, and let's put it together and not make it kind of the unwritten rules, make it the written rules.
Yeah, so fascinating. So there's a number of really big ahas, but one in particular that got my attention that I especially love is this idea that you talk about around experience capital. What do you mean by experience capital?
So, experience capital, let me put it with some data because that's sort of my power alley of comfort, which is that 50% of your lifetime earnings comes from what you gain on the job. The other 50% comes from what you did at school, your formal learning. Now, why is this important? This is very important because women do exceptionally well at school.
Right.
In the United States and in other countries, we graduate at higher rates than men. We exceed our population numbers in terms of the number of graduates for undergraduate degrees. And we get great grades. We know how to get those A's. But I don't think we're getting those A's and we're not graduating to the top ranks in the experience capital side of things. And so we talk about this because just as you are good at getting your good grades and earning those degrees in school, you've got to apply some of that same chutzpah to how you earn your experience capital over your lifetime. And the quicker you earn it, the better.
What are we talking about exactly? How does somebody go about earning that experience capital?
Yeah. So, most of the time you think of the jobs that you have, but I think one of the things to think about are the underlying skills because you're building a set of skills. Think of those as like the courses you take in school
Mhm.
that arm you to have more and more opportunity and to be up for those promotions. And so it's not just the job you have, it's the set of skills that you can take in your backpack with you to continue progressing and creating opportunities for yourself. And so those skills may be hard skills, like if you're a sales rep, delivering on your quota. There are sort of quantitative requirements. There are things that are very explicit, especially early in your career. But the other thing is there's soft skills. And we talk about this soft skills, treat them like hard skills. So, how you display empathy for customers and for your colleagues, how you lead, how you show entrepreneurialism. Entrepreneurialism isn't just about being a founder of a company. It's about the skills that you demonstrate. You could be a founder of a small business or, a large AI company that's going to beat the world, or you could be an entrepreneur within, a Fortune 500 company in your role. So how do you start to build these things and think about your time and what you're gaining differently?
So, Lorena, you have told me you shared an interesting story that I'd love for my listeners to hear, as an example of. I guess this is an example of experience capital, but it's an interesting example of somebody who really got out of her comfort zone, tried something completely new. Maybe tell that story.
Oh, well, thank you, Laura. As folks who, if you know me, I spend all my time in technology, and one of the things I really believe is that everyone can be a technologist, and whether you studied computer science or engineering in college is fine, but you can also gain it as experience capital on the job. So my favorite story about this is someone people may know named Carly Kloss. She's a supermodel. And she's been modeling since, she was a teenager. She's been on the cover of all these magazines. And this is her full-time job. And in that course, she was building her networks and she was meeting all these incredible CEOs. And she was like, "What's common about all these entrepreneurs I'm meeting?" And she said, "They all know how to code. I don't know how to code, but they all know how to code." So she signed herself up to learn how to code. She taught herself how to code. By the way, she was a good math and science student growing up, taught herself how to code, and she said, "This is such an important skill." And then she used her fame and her power to say, "I'm going to found a nonprofit called Code with Clossy." And she has a summer boot camp and a course that teaches young girls how to code. And she makes it fun and accessible. And she's like, "This is such an important skill. I want to make sure young girls have it." And that Code with Clossy nonprofit has had their 10-year anniversary and they've got these stories of women who start in the program and then do a little bit more in school. And now they're in the work world. And it's incredible. So it's a good story of I kind of think that someone who doesn't need to code was driven to learn the skill
Uh-huh.
and then maybe didn't use it for, quote, her next job, but used it to pay it forward to
Right.
make sure other women were successful.
Yeah, I love that story. That's an amazing story.
She's great. She's absolutely inspirational.
Yeah. From a tactical perspective, how do you advise women to go about maybe measuring whether they're building these skills and kind of how to create that toolkit that they are essentially working against, right? Some kind of a checklist or some kind of a way for determining whether they're actually achieving those elements of experience
Yeah, I
cap.
mean, I think the challenge is it's not 100% linear. And I
Mm,
wish we could boil it down to checklists. Part of this is I think there's some markers, and let's talk about what they are. There's also, a bit of think about it as being a portfolio manager of your career, and they're portfolio managers of money and they invest over time, both short term and long term. How do you do that? Now, obviously, you're like, okay, let's be a little more practical. What are some of the markers? One marker is getting promoted. One
right.
marker is actually getting promoted and climbing up that corporate ladder, which is kind of the emphasis and the title of the book. Part of it is making lateral moves that will give you some of the skills that will put you in place to take a two-step leap on the ladder.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not that the goal is to become a CEO, but the goal is to fulfill your full potential. And that is something subjective. Everybody defines that differently. But part of it is what you earn from your wages, and part of it is getting promoted to have those
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah. You talk about moving laterally, and there's a lot of discussion in the book about the importance of being willing to change jobs, which I think is much easier said than done. Maybe advice for how you go through the process of evaluating when you should change a job, especially as you're looking at this concept of experience capital. Maybe talk a little bit about how you guys are thinking about that.
Yeah. So there's changing companies, there's changing jobs. All of
Right.
that takes some risk. So I think before we even get to what moves you would make, I do think, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, it does require a level of self confidence. And part of this, and my personal encouragement, is there are the performance markers of things we know we've learned and done. But there's also something men do very well. And I encourage women to do this is to bet on their potential. So there's
Mm,
the things that you do, the things that you know, and absolutely you have to check the box on the requirements of your job. You have to deliver on what those OKRs or MBOs are. But on top of that, have some confidence, and it is a little bit of a leap of faith that your potential is worth betting on. So I think that like from a kind of inner perspective, I think that's one kind of mindset that's really important. In terms of like jobs, I mean, I am close this year to celebrating my 25th year at McKinsey. It's a long
Oh,
time.
wow.
I know. It flew
Congratulations.
by very quickly. I feel like I just started and it's hard for me to imagine that that much time has gone by. And some people say, well, Lorena, you suggest these things, but you haven't left the company. I mean, in a long time. And I was reflecting on this question, and I've probably had 5 or 6 jobs within my time at McKinsey,
Mm, mhm,
and they've been really different, and some of them have really challenged me with great skill distance, something we call bold moves, where 20% or more of the new role is different and uses different skills than what you were doing before. So I think one of the things is to try and get as broad of a portfolio of skills as possible. You're going to have to take different roles. Maybe you're going to have to move companies to gain that breadth of experience. And it's not just about the immediate thing you're doing, it's about the long term. And so a couple of markers are in your experience over time, have you had a P&L role, a profit and loss role? Where you've managed the core of the business. You don't need to do it forever. You may love it, so
mhm,
then do it forever. But it gives you a different insight always to have some P&L experience. Another one is, have you really, to that point I made about bold move, have you stretched yourself where a new job slightly terrifies you because 20% or more of that job is something radically different than what you were doing?
mhm.
Those are a few markers. The other thing is we know women get stuck with wages that they're not excited about, and sometimes you do need to take a couple of moves or even move companies where, you can then jump to the next level, get the promotion, and actually get the salary bump. I think it's unrealistic to say that your wages or your earnings don't matter. They do matter. They're not the only thing that should motivate you, but to say, like, we shouldn't look at your paycheck, that's unrealistic.
Yeah, sure. So interesting. One of the things that you said about taking on a P&L role, I'm curious, for women that find themselves in roles that they absolutely love, is there a way that you have found where they can maybe create some of those dynamics even though they're operating at a senior level in a cost center, like not a P&L role, but actually a cost center? Is there a way that you have seen folks maybe restructure an existing job so that they're able to ultimately create that type of experience capital that's so important that you talk about in the book?
Oh, absolutely, and I think I was nodding so vigorously, it, like, put up a thumbs
I
up
know.
on the screen. Um, Absolutely. So let's take an example of a role. Let's say that you are in tech, and that's something that I'm in, and sometimes that's actually for me, that is a P&L role, but let's say you're in the support function of technology. How do you think, and you're serving the business segment, how do you think about the business segment in some ways as your customer? And how do you think about the customers that they're trying to serve? Maybe you're at a retailer. How do
Mhm.
you think about the fundamental customer? And what is that shopping experience? What is that buying experience? What is that cost experience? What's the friction in that? You would think all the way to the customer. And then you would think about like what are the P&L leaders trying to solve? And then you work backwards and you say, well, how can the things I know well address that? And how can I partner with the business to achieve those goals? Yes, I am a cost center, but I'm also part of the growth equation if done right. And I'm also an important cost and it needs to be used wisely. Those investments matter. And so, how do I, if I'm, in IT, the typical mantra is 80% is kind of run the business, 20% innovate. How do I make sure that my 20%, if I free up costs on the run the business, I can actually increase 30% to innovate the business? And then how do I collaborate with the business leaders to achieve that? That's huge. And
Mm,
so I
mhm.
think, like, that mindset of who ultimately is the customer, what's the experience we're trying to drive? It doesn't matter whether you're running the P&L of the business or your cost center, that's a really important set of skills. And by the way, all of those skills I mentioned are not how well you code on Python, right? They're not how well you can balance the books. They're not the ability to do like, a multivariate regression on Excel. Those were soft skills that are incredibly important. And those skills become important sooner than you think. You do not need to be the head of the unit for those to be important. Those are important as soon as you're a first line manager.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's really great perspective. Let's maybe take a step back and think about as you're thinking about that first job or maybe second job right out of college, you talk about and you have a terminology in particular about what you should be looking for in that first job. So I'd love for you to describe that, something that I think is a bit counterintuitive for a lot of people. Maybe explain that if
Well,
you would.
each title of the chapter is a synthesis of like a little piece of a nugget we think is really helpful. And this nugget is pick a company, not a job. So let's
Mm,
say you're picking, you're in your early 20s or your mid 20s and you're looking for a job and you have two jobs in front of you. Um, and one is to be a sales rep at company A, and another one is to be a sales rep at company B. And let's just say that they roughly make the same amount, in fact, equal. Is there a difference in the job? Absolutely, because you have the same job. Pick the company. So, which company has women in the top leadership? Which company has programs to support women? Which company values fairness? Which company, another version of that's a fancier word, runs on a
mm,
meritocracy? Which companies have training programs for men and women that accelerate, invest in your potential and your skills? And let me bring this to a specific story. So, the opening story of Pick a Company, Not a Job is this incredible woman. And I will say where she is now, which is she just retired from being the COO of Box, which is a publicly listed company. It's one of these phenomenal companies in Silicon Valley. So, she's the COO, number two job in the company. Amazing, right? What was her first job? Her first job, she picked a company. She grew up in Australia. She came to the United States. She picked IBM. Why did she pick IBM? And of all the stories in her career, she's been at all the major telcos and all the major high tech companies. She picked her IBM story to share with us because IBM had an incredible leadership program and it taught her the fundamentals of leadership, how to lead, how to organize your time, how to mobilize teams, how to think about your P&L. She was a sales rep. She was that sales rep that I was just describing, and she had the benefit of this leadership program, which was incredible investment. And there was a cohort of them that was a network of peers that are all successful. That took her to Telstra, took her to Cisco, took her to Apple, took her to Box. And she's an amazing leader. And she talks
mm.
about picking the right company. And by the way, she talks about how there were women. She could see women at every level. And so I'm not saying go to IBM. What I'm saying is ask the questions that help you pick a company who's going to invest in you, especially when you're starting out. All you are is potential.
Right. Right. I also think it probably applies too to thinking about that organization that maybe the pay is lower potentially, but it's going to give you so much more experience or maybe an opportunity to lead at a sooner level. They may be paying you less money, but maybe it's worth the risk just because again of the experience capital that you're likely to ultimately acquire as a
Exactly.
result.
So, in that case, yes or no, the most important thing is that you don't just look at your offer. You take the time to ask a lot of questions. And
Mhm.
ask the questions that give you an understanding. What's the culture? What are the odds of getting promoted? What's the support to gain those skills? Like, ask questions, talk to people who work in the company. Look at the company's website. If you see no women, that suggests there might be no women. And are you comfortable going into an environment where there are no women in the C-suite?
Might be a great opportunity, then again, it might
I'm
not.
just saying, like, some of the research isn't actually that deep. Look at the website, look at its earnings report, look at what it writes and it says.
Mhm,
Look at who
mhm.
graduated from that company.
Yeah, yeah, really, really
The internet's
smart.
a really good tool for some of this research in addition to talking to humans. Like, go talk to
Sure.
people who work there. What's your experience? You're someone 5 or 6 years ahead of me. How's it going? How do you like it here?
Let's play this forward a bit and look at I know you are in Silicon Valley. There's been a lot of layoffs, a lot of sort of restructuring that's been happening over the course of the last few years. Let's talk about how this concept of experience capital applies to helping you maybe be better prepared, making you, I'm sorry, I'm really inarticulate today, helping you be better prepared for potential downturns or, inevitable events that ultimately occur? How can that help you there?
Well, I think it's a great question. We've come off on an unprecedented 10-year run where it was all growth. And that meant growth in employees, growth in revenue, growth in equity. So, I mean, we are coming off an unusually, uncharacteristic of the last 100 years of
Right,
economy.
right.
And I think in Silicon Valley specifically, it's had more high highs and low lows. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember 2008. Some of us are old enough to remember 2000. you know? so,
Right.
it's been a long cycle of prosperity, and I think that also applies outside of Silicon Valley for sure. Um, what I think is something we talked about at the beginning of this is the skills that you have are something people and employers can't take away from you. And it's important to say it's not just that I was working at X company. And certainly you should have organized the accomplishments and what you should take credit for that you contributed to from an outcomes perspective. You grew revenue by X, you improved marketing effectiveness by Y, you improved product quality by Z. You should have that ready. But in addition, reflect on the skills. What kind of evidence of entrepreneurialism do you have? What kind of evidence of
Mm,
leadership do you have? What kind of evidence, et cetera, of those
mhm,
type of skills that you have? Do you have experience with P&L? And so I do think that's an important reflection. Then I mean, look, there's nothing fun about a layoff. There's like no sugarcoating it. But I think the question is, it happens to both men and women. So this is not a gendered comment. How do you find the strength and find the inner confidence, maybe through friends, maybe through your network, to get back up and
mm,
find the next thing? And finding the next thing, there's activate understanding what your skills are, what you bring, having an expansive and realistic view of the sets of jobs. So it could be the exact thing you have for another company, or with the skills, you might expand the aperture of what you're capable of. So, Laura, one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is the importance of networks.
mm,
So, if you find yourself looking for a job unexpectedly, or if you would like to proactively look for a new job, or a new role within your company, your networks will be incredibly important. And what that is your peer network and a network of people who open doors. And I know, Laura, you and I both know that there's a huge difference between mentors and sponsors, and you need both. But
right.
in quick summary, a mentor is someone who inspires you, you relate to them, they spend time, they show you empathy, they're a role model. A sponsor is someone who does all of that and opens up opportunities. They bring you to a meeting, they let you present, they introduce you to other people, they give you the hard advice. Maybe they also give you the feedback, but they are opening doors for you. And maybe in the promotion room, they're putting your name onto the slate. That might be within your company, giving you a chance on a high visibility project or being behind the scenes pushing your promotion. Or in the case of finding a job, putting your name in the hat for something, connecting you to someone else in another organization. You've got to activate your whole network when you're looking for the new thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think too, and this may be stating the obvious, but when you think about this idea of experience capital, it strikes me that it also gives you an opportunity to exponentially ignite your network because you're expanding it, right? Based on those
Absolutely.
roles. Maybe talk a little bit about how that
Well,
works.
you would start building your network from day one, your first day on the job. And of course, in the beginning, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm looking for friends. you know. And so at
Right.
first you're gonna gain your network through explicit sort of tasks and jobs and projects. You're gonna meet people, you're gonna work together, and then, from there you're gonna continue to invest in those relationships. Or you're gonna work for a manager and invest in that relationship. So that's the beginning steps of a network. But one person, that person can introduce you to another person, to another person, to another person. And I think it is the job of being proactive and building your network over time. I have to say, in the beginning of my career, I was not good at this. But over time, there would be a client who would reach back out to me, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, why are they reaching out to me? I should be reaching out to them. My goodness.
That's funny.
Thank goodness that they're sort of offering to mentor me. That's a good feedback. And so I'm not saying that I personally have done this elegantly or well, but, the act of building it, and think of it almost like, the analogy of putting money into your savings account. It earns a
Right.
little interest, and then it compounds and compounds and compounds. And over time, building an internal and external network to where you work becomes really powerful. And when the chips are down, you're going to need your network. And when the chips are up, you feel that you can offer help and expansion to others. And that's a great feeling. Like whenever I've been able to give something to others, that has felt so good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge investment in yourself that you can make. I absolutely love that. Okay, you guys talk in the book about how motherhood can also be an experience capital escalator. How is that?
So many people, and you yourself are sort of like, hey, is that quizzically looking like, is that really the case? So you have unbelievable economists like Claudia Golden who have shown how motherhood can really hold us back in terms of our wages, in terms of perceptions, and all these type of things. So first of all, like all of that fact base exists. The question that we're trying to get at is how do you create the tactics to create a round trip ticket? And the concept of the round trip ticket is you're going one way, but you also want to come
Mm,
back to your organization and you want to actually continue thriving. So, what are those stories against the odds? The other thing that we looked at is sort of urban legend, I would say. And I'd love to tell one of those stories. But I think, just at the highest level, motherhood is an amazing personal milestone. And I just think that what we wanted to challenge in the book through stories and through some of the tactics and strategies is it doesn't have to be a deflator for your career.
yeah.
And I'm not saying that's easy. I am not saying it's easy at all. And we know that men gain more experience year for year than women. And oftentimes it is the break. I have 3 kids. In fact, actually across our 3 authors, we have 9 kids, each of us.
Is
Nine
that right? Oh,
9
that's
kids among 3 of
amazing.
us, but 3 of them are mine. And I had one every decade. And I tell you, like, I've made so many mistakes each time. I'm just really very grateful that it all turned out. But so I'm not in any way saying it's easy. I'm not saying that companies have it all set up. The programs and support
Mm,
for working parents, both men and women, vastly differs across companies. So, with all that said, the question is, how do you buck the trend? And the one story I wanted to share because I just found it really inspiring is there's a woman named Dina in California, and she was a high powered lawyer at a tech company. And it doesn't come out in the book because if you don't, you have to be with her to see that she is a force. She is just such great energy. She's a born leader. She had 3 boys. She took
well,
14 years out to raise those boys full time. She did philanthropy work, volunteer work, always engaged in the community, but she was not working in tech as a lawyer. 14 years later, she goes back to a reboarding program at LinkedIn and is back in the legal department, rising up. And she's showing her boys what that looks like to have your mom as a full time mom and also your mom
mhm,
as a power player in Silicon Valley and working and leading differently. And that those 2 things are not one or the other, they're all the same mom. And I just the reboarding programs after an extensive period of
right.
time off are
Yeah.
not as common as we would like, but they do happen. And I think just the courage it took her and the sort of soft skills it takes
Mhm.
to bring yourself back because you've been out for a while. You know, lots of things have changed Think about
Right.
privacy, like privacy, data privacy has completely changed in the last 14 years, what we right? Thinking about like, all the sets of skills and capabilities required to do that job well. So you have to go back to learning, you have to work your way back up. You also have to realize you're going to work with very different people of different ages. But this is amazing. Like you can create a round trip ticket for yourself, whether that's 2 months, a year, maybe even 14 years.
Do you look at maybe ways that we can do a better job of I mean, certainly you can take whatever kind of break you wanna take, right? Whatever your family situation will allow, but staying invested at a high level, it sounds like the example that you share, she was invested in certain ways, but maybe from the standpoint of staying current on some of the, trends that were happening around privacy, around, all these sorts of things that have developed over the last few years. Um, that if you could find a way to be more invested in those things while you're taking that break, could you close that gap a bit so that you don't have to start if you decide to get back on the corporate track, that you don't have to start as far back perhaps as what maybe she did? And I think it's why a lot of people, a lot of women who take these breaks end up taking on an entrepreneurial role just because the corporate track tends to be harder to kinda get back and pick up that momentum because there are other people who've surpassed you, who are younger than you. Maybe talk a little bit about those dynamics, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I mean, there are a ton of dynamics in there. So one is, would you go back to a large company? Would you start your own thing? I think yes and yes, like either. Like I think you
Mhm.
should put your name out there for both sets of opportunities. I don't think it's one or the other. The other thing is I wouldn't discount the ways in which you were active. So if you were on a nonprofit board, if you were taking, initiatives in the community, that counts. But also it's not just the skills that you learned, it's the network you've built. You must know other people and maybe you have to activate your
Mhm.
social network in a different way. And maybe it is it harder? For sure. Is it if I've been in the workforce for the last 25 years, is it easier? Of course it is. Of course, but it's not insurmountable. It may take 3 or 4
Right.
conversations before you get to the one that's useful. But I think, and underneath it, I do think don't forget your core things that you have had, like curiosity, ability to learn. These are things back to your student days that did you so well in school, did you really well for however long you worked, and are going to be really critical. So yes, like, have you had a job gap? Absolutely. Does that have very practical I don't wanna dismiss, I mean, it depends,
Sure.
like, right, there may be economic situations where, you know, you don't have the luxury of time and choice. So, I mean, I don't wanna dismiss that, it it's, everyone has very unique circumstances, but I do think that that concept of bobbing and weaving and saying, "Okay, wait, how can I get there? And could I do this? And can I take a couple of other steps?" And that initiative taking and a little bit of refusal to hear no. I mean, certainly take the feedback, but, "Okay, great. So then let's try something else. Try something else. Let's keep going." That is a bit of that drive, especially making a pivot.
Yeah, I love that. So, this book, I think, builds on incredible work that's happened at McKinsey, the incredible research that you have been doing for more than a decade, 14 or so year oh, no, more like 20 years, a couple decades. You've been working on these topics, and it, of course, builds on incredible work that Joanna Barsh did with her 2 books, How Remarkable Women Lead and Centered Leadership, which I highly recommend, are great books, and I know you know Joanna, and it builds on work by leanin.org and our friend Sheryl Sandberg, and so much of this information. So maybe talk a little bit about the impact that you hope that this particular book, The Broken Rung, will have.
Well, the way you describe it's like, read all those books as a collection. I mean, look, every step, we haven't cracked this. Let's just step back. Women at the top are 29%. When Lean In and ourselves and Cheryl started our research on women in the workplace 10 years ago, that number was 19%. So we went from 19% in corporate America, women at the C-suite, reporting to the CEO, to 29%. That's a material change. I think we're all good with math. That is not 50%. And we
No.
are not going to get to 50% anytime soon. So we are better, but we are not equal. And, you look at every level and there are real challenges. And I don't mean that to be depressing. I just mean that that is actually the state of the state. And yes, some policies are better. I think parental leave policies are better in the vast majority of cases. But are they like addressing all the pain points? No. Is there room for improvement? Of course. And so I think that, you know, in an imperfect world, each of these pieces, the extraordinary work Joanna did, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the amazing, Cheryl's book Lean In, and many others, so many others like Feminist Fight Club. There have been so many books and pieces that have been written. And hopefully what ours does is continue to build off of that and give you some additional ideas, thoughts, and hopefully practical. Like my hope is that woman reads this and in the next year, she's like, oh, I could use chapter 6. And she can use it to her advantage. Like, I just hope that it helps women continue to take that step. And, there's just a whole body of work that we continue to build off of to make, to see more women succeed. We still have a ways to go.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for being here and thank you for this tremendous contribution. I'm really happy to meet you
Oh,
today.
thank you, Laura, so much for having me.
Of course, I'll include links where folks can purchase the book and learn a little bit more about you and your work. And again, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. Hey, friend, if today's discussion about experience capital resonated with you, I would love to hear. I'd be so grateful if you'd take a minute and leave a review for She Said podcast. You can do so on iTunes or on your favorite podcast platform. The reason why reviews are so important is because your feedback, those reviews, actually help other women who are looking for enriching content like this to find it. So you're doing all of us a favor. I would also love to hear how you're thinking about your own experience capital in light of this conversation. Is this a concept that's new to you? Something that might shift how you're thinking about your professional journey? I'd love to hear. You can connect with me on social media. You'll find me on all the platforms at Laura Cox Kaplan, or you can drop me an email through our website at shesaidpodcast.com. Friend, I'm so grateful to you for listening to this latest episode of She Said Podcast, a weekly production of She Said Media. I'm glad you decided to spend some time with me today. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.